stories for bedtime
and car time
and playtime.
And anytime you want to hear how much Jesus loves you in all this world.
Even little birds.
Hello, this is Pastor Sarah at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Davenport, Iowa. Welcome to this podcast where we tell stories told just for kids and kids at heart. Every week we tell a story about Jesus from the Bible, and for this podcast you need to bring your imagination, because we are going to imagine that there was a little bird in all of those Bible stories, a little bird who was friends with Jesus, a little bird who saw all the stuff that Jesus did and heard all the things that Jesus said. Well, happy day to you, podcast friends. The last few weeks, we've been telling stories about Jesus and the miraculous things that he did. Walking on water, healing people, turning water into wine. Well, starting this week, we're going to tell stories about stories. Jesus did a lot of teaching, but he didn't have smart boards or computers or podcasts or even books to help people learn. So one of his favorite things to do was to tell stories. These stories are often called parables. And parables teach us about how we can live in the world and what is important to Jesus. They invite us to see ourselves and the world a little bit differently. So for the next few weeks, we'll hear about some of those parables or teaching stories of Jesus. So listen in to Season 2, Episode 6.
Little Bird and Jesus tell the parable of the soil.
One day, Little Bird was with Jesus and his friends on the seashore. They'd just gotten back from some time out on the water, fishing and resting. They were cooking their fish on a little fire they made and talking, like they often did. While the disciples and Jesus ate a bunch of fish, Little Bird hopped up and down the shore, pecking at the sand for little bits of plants and tiny insects. Jesus' friend Philip, who was always keeping an eye on Little Bird, noticed her, and then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a little cloth bag. Philip shouted to her, "Little Bird, I've got a surprise for you." So Little Bird flew over, and she saw Philip pouring sunflower seeds out of that little pouch onto the palm of his hand. Philip said, "I know these are your favorite, and I saw them when we passed through some fields a few days ago. Here you go. Eat them while we eat this tilapia." Well, Little Bird was so excited. She loved sunflower seeds. They definitely were her favorite. She slowly savored each one, pecking open the shell and eating the tasty middle. While she was eating it, she heard Andrew say, "Hey, Philip, I've got some bird seed a few months ago." Philip could tell that this was a setup for a joke. So he took the bait and responded, "Oh, you did? You got some bird seed?" "Yeah," said Andrew, "but it still hasn't grown any birds." They all laughed, but Little Bird thought it was ridiculous. Birds don't grow from seeds. They're born from eggs. But the joking didn't last long, because someone must have noticed that Jesus was there on that beach that day, and that person told someone else, who must have told someone else, who must have told 200 other someones, because pretty soon the whole beach was covered with people who wanted to hear Jesus teach. The disciples quickly ate their fish and stamped out the fire. As the beach filled with people, Jesus and his friends were getting pushed into the shallows of the water. Not only were their feet wet, but hardly anyone could see Jesus when he was down in the water. And so Jesus hopped up onto a small fishing boat, the one that the disciples had just pulled up onto shore. It was like Jesus was on a floating stage. Many of the disciples also climbed onto the boat, sitting down near where Jesus was standing. And as they settled down to listen to Jesus, Philip saw Little Bird and gave her a big smile. He pulled out his pouch of seeds and poured them onto his hand. Little Bird was happy to have a little snack while Jesus taught the crowd, so she flew over and perched on Jesus' hand, munching on the delicious sunflower seeds. As soon as the crowd saw Jesus standing on the boat, they got very quiet. They were so eager to hear Jesus. For a minute, Jesus stood there looking at the crowd, like he was trying to figure out what to talk about. He hadn't planned for this impromptu teaching session on the beach. Jesus looked around, as he often did, to get inspiration from nature or the people around him, and his eyes settled on Little Bird, chomping on the sunflower seeds in Philip's hand. Little Bird watched as Jesus' eyes lit up, and a big smile came across his face. He had an idea. Jesus turned to the crowd and said, "Listen up, and let me tell you a story. There was a farmer who had some seeds. He started to scatter them all over, tossing seeds here and there and everywhere. The farmer didn't just plant a few seeds in a nice, neat row. No, this farmer scattered seeds everywhere he could. Well, some of those seeds landed on a path, but those seeds didn't have a chance to grow." Jesus smiled at Little Bird as he was speaking, and he continued the story. "They couldn't grow because some birds came and ate up those seeds sitting on the path. Well, some other seeds fell onto gravel, and the seeds in the rocky, gravelly soil started to sprout up right away. But then the sun came out and they dried right up, and those seeds withered away without any deep roots. Other seeds fell in a very weedy patch, and those weeds didn't make any space for the seeds to grow, and they died out right away. But," Jesus continued, "some of the seeds fell on good soil. And those seeds put down deep roots, and they grew into tall and strong plants with flowers and vegetables and so much more. And they produced the most amazing harvest." Well, after Jesus finished the story about seeds and a sower or a farmer, he kept teaching about God's great big dream of love for this world, and how that love is for everyone. Jesus talked, and Little Bird ate sunflower seeds and listened. Later that day, after the crowds had gone back home, the disciples and Jesus were back out on the water, doing some fishing and taking a break from all the people who were always around Jesus. Little Bird was hopping around on the deck of the boat, trying to get any last bit of sunflower seeds that might have dropped earlier in the day. Philip noticed her, and he asked Jesus, "Jesus, that parable, the one about the seeds, what does it mean?" Well, Jesus was very excited. He said, "Good question, Philip. These stories I tell, these parables, always point to God and God's love. And here's what that story about the seed means. The seed is like God's message of love. With such delight and joy and hope, God plants that love everywhere, all over the place. God just spreads that message of love here and there and everywhere. And people are like the soil. Sometimes we are like the hard soil on the path, and we don't feel that love, or we're not ready to receive it. But that doesn't stop God from planting, from loving. And sometimes we are like the rocky soil, and we start to feel that message of love, and it starts to grow on us. But life gets hard, and it sort of fades away. But that doesn't stop God from planting and from loving. And sometimes we are like that seed in the weeds, and life gets busy and full, and there's no room for God or worship or prayer or anything. But not even that stops God from planting and loving. And sometimes, a lot of times, you are like that good soil, and the message of God's love takes root in you and becomes a part of you, and then it grows and grows and grows. And you start to live that message of love with your own acts of love and kindness, sharing and faithfulness. Jesus kept talking and explaining this parable, and he said, then God keeps on planting and loving then too. And you are part of spreading that message of love in the world. As Jesus kept talking with his disciples, Little Bird nibbled on the sunflower seeds and thought about how this message of love had been planted in her. First from Jesus and then through his friends, people like Philip, who collected seeds to feed her, and so many others who loved her. It was like a great big garden where love and goodness were blooming and growing. A great big garden that brought joy to humans and birds and all creation. So, podcast friends, have you ever planted seeds and watched them grow? Usually, I plant seeds in very specific places, and I'm very careful with them because I don't have many seeds. But this story reminds us that God has so much love, and that God doesn't just give that love to some people in some places, but God just gives and gives that love to everyone, everywhere. Well, even though it's not really the best time of year to plant seeds, at least where I am right now, maybe you can plant a few seeds in good soil inside and let the sunshine warm them as they grow. Or you can go outside and pay attention to what plants you see and how they are growing. Do you see any plants growing in an unusual place, like in a sidewalk or someplace kind of rocky? Maybe this week you can also think about God's message of love that's growing in you. Who are the people who helped you hear about God's love or helped you know more about God? Maybe it's a parent or a friend or someone at church. Maybe this week you can thank God for them and the ways they helped plant God's love in your life. And maybe this week you can find some ways to keep that message of love growing in you. Maybe by going to church or reading a Bible, a story Bible, or saying a prayer, or by showing love to someone else. You could even show love by putting some bird seed out for the birds. That would be pretty sweet. And as you do, just remember that God is always loving you and never stops planting that love in you and in other people. And with God's help, that love just keeps growing and growing and growing. Thanks for listening to this episode of Little Bird and Jesus. Have a great week.
Now flap your little wings. Sing a little song.
And remember that to Jesus,
You will always belong.
Thanks for listening to Little Bird and Jesus, a podcast of St. Paul Lutheran Church in Davenport, Iowa. For more information on St. Paul, visit us at stpaulqc.org.